As we mentioned, we're working through the book of Job, and we have been dealing with this subject, a question of suffering, the problem of evil. And I've used the word evil, just to clarify, I'm using that in the philosophical sense, if you want to say it that way. Everything that falls into the category of bad stuff. I don't just mean spiritual evil in one sense, but anything from paper cuts and stubbing your toe and headaches all the way to brain tumors and the death of children and all the horror of the world. All manner of wickedness and suffering comes under the category, the philosophical category of evil. The question of evil and the problem of evil becomes, some people call it a problem, because they think, well, if God is good, how can evil exist? If God is all-powerful, why doesn't he stop it? If God is all-knowing, how come he doesn't stop this before it happens? Why? How can we have evil and a good God at the same time? And so they find this to be a conundrum, and some people have even reached the conclusion that therefore God cannot exist because evil exists, which in fact is another problem, because evil cannot exist if God does not exist, and we won't get into that philosophically because that's not what I'm about this morning. But needless to say, it's a deep subject and a challenging subject. I haven't told you that the book of Job is a very organized book. I just thought I'd give you a quick understanding of where we have been through the book. We're leaping through it. Just want to give you a quick overview of the outline of how this book works. Chapters 1 to 3 kind of laid the groundwork of what is going on and set the scene. And chapters 4 to 15 begin a cycle. And we've been working through this cycle together. Eliphaz speaks and Job responds, Bildad, then Job, and then Zophar, and then Job. And we've been going around back and forth looking at these conversations. We're up to as far as Zophar. Then you'll notice, if you read the book, that chapters 15 to 21 repeat the same cycle. That they begin again, it's very organized, and they take turns, at least as it's written here, and they respond back and forth to each other. And you get somewhat of the same arguments around and around again, and they just do it. They're arguing the same discussion. And then chapters 22 to 37 does the same thing for a third cycle through the book of Job with one slight variation. Eliphaz, Job, Bildad, Job, and then instead of Zophar, Elihu speaks. And who is Elihu? We don't know him until we get into that chapter, and we'll meet him in days to come. And Elihu has one shot, one kick at the can, and then Job responds. That is an overview and outline of the book. And I'm sure you remember where we have been, but since we're leaping through this book, let me just give you some kind of a running understanding of where we're at and how this has unfolded. Because to jump back into the middle where we are today, excuse me, without some measure of context, I think it lends itself to context. So let's just do a little bit of that. You know the beginning. The first chapters are very clear. The suffering of Job begins with his financial loss. Loss of what we would think to be his business. He has so many camels, and you would imagine a trade route, and this man is very wealthy. It's all gone in a moment, in 2 cycles. And then he loses his children, all 10 of his children. In one day, all this has happened to him. And if you remember the text, it comes in 4 stages. And it's almost as if it comes from the north, the south, the east, and the west. It's as if the author is saying that Job is overwhelmed, that there is no stone unturned in his life that hasn't been shaken up, except one. He hasn't been touched physically. And so the challenge comes for God to allow Satan, the accuser, to touch Job's body. So Job begins to suffer enormously. The text doesn't say specifically what the problem is. We have translated it in English, boils, for centuries. It's more than just that by the description that we have through Job. But he is in great pain, and he expects to die. He has lost vast amounts of weight. He's sitting on the garbage heap, which is what you would do with a dead animal that you had in your property. You just drag it out to the ash heap. Job just takes himself out to the curb. His friends gather around because they assume that this is also going to be a day of a funeral. They're waiting for it. And Job is so heart-struck, so bewildered, that he curses the day. He begs that God would undo his birthday. Then as Job's friends begin to gather around him, Job has suffered emotionally, he suffered physically, and now he begins to suffer psychologically because his friends begin to so-called comfort him by telling him that, Job, this came on you because you deserved it. Eliphaz begins to defend the notion of retribution. We live in a world of cause and effect. That the reason that this bad thing has happened to you is because you've done bad thing. A bad thing only comes on bad people. You've done something bad, so something bad comes on you. It's just karma, Job. That's the way the universe works. He hasn't used that word, of course, but that's ultimately the same sort of notion. He defends that to the nth degree. Job maintains that this is not the case. In fact, as readers, we know this is not the case. We are told that Job is blameless. This is not to indicate that he's sinless. This is to let the reader know, and it's emphasized many times in the first chapters, that Job, the suffering that he is undergoing, has nothing to do with anything in his life. The reader knows that at the outset. This is not true, Eliphaz, the reader would cry out. It is not the case. We know it's not the case. And Job says it's not the case. He's not calling himself sinless. He's calling himself blameless. I'm innocent of anything that would bring this on me. And we know that's the case. Then Bildad preaches. He tells Job that God is a God of justice and he makes no mistakes. If you are suffering, it's because you deserve to be suffering. God is a perfect God of justice. Job says, I know all these things. You're telling me nothing that I don't already know. Yes, God is a God of justice, but it's not right to fall on me. And Job begins to unravel. He begins to wonder why it is that he is being punished, so-called punished unjustly. He is certain of this, and he begins to formulate the notion that God has made a mistake, a serious mistake in the balance of the universe. Job knows no way to prove his innocence to his friends. And he begins to talk about talking to God in a case like he was going to sue God. If I could bring my case to God, if I could go to court, if I could prove this, my problem would be I would have no way to give evidence of my own innocence. This is not fair that I can't even bring into a court case and somehow show my innocence. God, who would put me on the stand, would unveil something somewhere because he knows everything about all of us. And of course I'm not perfect. But what do I do to show that this suffering is unjust? It is unfair. And Job is experiencing the very same things that our human hearts go through in the midst of our confusion. This seems unfair. Why did this happen to me? I don't deserve this. There are times when you know you reap what you sow. You've done foolish things, and so you get back what you've done because you put yourself in that situation. You chose this. Now you're working out the decision of your own circumstance. But we know there are times when you have not chosen anything, and something has come on you, the death of a child, an illness, or a car accident, whatever the case. And there are sometimes horrific results, life-changing, life-altering results that on the surface to us seem unfair, unjust. And we ask the same questions. If God is good, how can this happen? If God is all-knowing, why didn't he stop this? If God is all-powerful, why didn't he intervene? What is going on? And Job is doing nothing more than all of us do. And he has no way to prove his innocence. In fact, he begins to suspect that God is actually not a good God at all. If I wash myself with snow, we read this last week, cleanse my hands with lye. It's the same picture of Pilate in front of Jesus at the trial, physically doing something to demonstrate his innocence. If Job says, if I could do something to demonstrate my innocence, verse 31 of Job 9, you would plunge me into a pit, God. Even if I could show my innocence, you would still push me down into the dirt, and my own clothes would abhor me. For he's not a man, God is not a man that I might answer him, that we should come to trial together. And Job laments this. There is no arbiter between us. I want you to remember that phrase. There's no referee. There's no umpire. There's no lawyer. There's nobody between me and God. I need somebody to come between me and God to plead my case, because I can't do this on my own. God has made a mistake. He is unjust to do this, and I don't know how to defend myself. I need an arbiter who might lay his hand on both of us. You have granted me life and steadfast love. Your care has preserved my spirit. You gave me right from the beginning. You know my name. You know who I am. You created life. Yet these things you hid in your heart, the suffering, you knew about this before it happened. And I know this was your purpose. You knew about this and you didn't stop it right from the beginning. And Job is asking why. Good question. The question of suffering often brings up the question, why? Zophar has a go at Job. Let me just give you a quick run at Zophar's sort of look at things. Should your babble silence men? You think you're going to stop us? All your talk and rhetoric about you being innocent and God making a mistake, you think that's going to actually keep us from talking? When you mock, shall no one shame you? You're mocking God. You're mocking the whole subject of why you're suffering. You say, my doctrine is pure and I am clean in God's eyes. But oh, that God would speak and open his lips to you. And Zophar's thing is that Job doesn't see the big picture. Zophar's deal is that if Job could just have the wisdom of God, he would see that there's a reason for this suffering. If God would speak and open his lips to you, that he would tell you the secrets of wisdom, for he is manifold in understanding. Know then that God exacts of you, how's this for a friend? God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. Right now you're suffering, but let me tell you something, you actually deserve more suffering. If you could see the big picture, if you had the wisdom of God, if you knew everything that was going on, there's a truth in that. We're always getting less than we deserve. There's a truth in that. There's something that Zophar is tapping into when he's talking about God that is actually accurate. Listen to this. Can you find out the deep things of God? Can you find out the limit of the Almighty? It's higher than heaven. What can you do? Steeper than Sheol. What can you know? Sheol, the place of the dead. Is that not true? Can you understand the big picture of God? No. Do you understand what God is doing all the time in the world? No. Is it bigger than our minds can grasp? Yeah. But see, what Zophar is doing is he's still missing the point. Job's point is that he is being punished unjustly. But Zophar won't hear that. He believes it's just, and he believes that Job just needs to see the big picture. God knows what you don't know. God knows that there's evil in you and that you deserve what's coming to you. Gives this picture of God going through a market. If he passes through and imprisons and summons the court, who can turn him back? He's passing through our humanity, through a marketplace. He sees somebody shoplifting and he imprisons them. Of course he would. He's God. He's righteous. Then he calls that person to court. Who can say to God, you have no right to bring charges to somebody who's wrong? Job's listening to Zophar. Job's got nothing to say. You're right, Zophar. What am I supposed to say? He knows worthless men. God knows, he sees people's hearts. When he sees iniquity, is he going to pass over it? Will he not consider it? Zophar, what are you saying that we don't already know about God? Yes, God is a righteous God. He does not overlook sin. If you prepare your heart, Job, Zophar says, you will stretch out your hand toward him, towards God. If your iniquity is in your hand, put it far away. Let not justice dwell in your tents. If you would just turn your heart around, if you would just get your life straight, surely then you will lift up your face without blemish. You will be secure and not fear. You will forget your misery. You will remember it as waters that have passed away. If you would turn from your sin, God will forgive you. What is he saying that we don't all agree with? Does God know all sin? Does God see everybody's heart? Does God see a big picture that we don't see? Does God overlook sin? No. Does the repentant person find mercy with God? The person who turns from their sin finds peace with God? Who can argue with Zophar? But Zophar, you're saying everything that's true, but you've still missed the point that Job is trying to make. Verse 20 of chapter 11, the eyes of the wicked will fail. All way of escape will be lost to them, and their hope is to breathe their last. If you don't find mercy with God, you have no hope. If you don't throw yourself on God's mercy to cover your sin, you have no hope. God will bring justice to your case. Zophar, thank you for telling us something that we already know. In fact, this is exactly what Job says. Verse chapter 13, responding to Zophar. What you know, I also know. Am I inferior to you? How have you said anything that we don't already know? But you're not getting the point, Zophar. I would speak to the Almighty. I desire to argue my case with God. This is Job's point. It's not that God doesn't see everything. It's not that God doesn't punish wickedness. It's that Job believes that God is in error, that God is doing something that is unjust, that Job's case is unique, that he is being treated unfairly. This is how we feel. This isn't right. This upsets the balance of the universe. How is it fair that a child gets leukemia and doesn't live to see their 6th birthday? And if you're the parent that sits on the side of the bed, you are asking these questions. How is this fair? This is not right. This case should be taken to God, and you should be able to say, you're not fair when this happens. That's what Job is trying to argue. He wants his case to be heard. Though he slay me. He wants to go right into God's presence. And he knows that if he goes into God's presence, the glory of God would kill. This is an Old Testament thought, and perfectly true, that the glorious presence of God would take your life. But I am going to march into God's presence with my case. And even if it kills me, I'm still going to trust him. I will argue my case to his face. I'm right. He's wrong. Behold, I have prepared my case, Job 13, verse 18. And I know I shall be in the right. I've thought about this. I've done nothing wrong. I'm absolutely blameless. God has made a mistake. There's something unbalanced in this universe, and I am suffering for it. Job responds to his friends back and forth and through that cycle that I've showed you. Leap now into chapter 16. His friends have gone back and forth and argued virtually the same things again, back and forth. Chapter 16, again, Job is making his case. Men have gaped at me with their mouths. He's talking about him sitting in the ash heap and his neighbors walking by. And their mouth is hanging open that Job, the man, the righteous man who everybody respected on the street, the guy who was the one who led the watching neighborhood watch for the neighborhood, and who was the first one to find out who was wrong and to bring justice to a situation. That guy is now suffering, and clearly when you're suffering, you're a bad person. So they're walking by with their chins hanging down. Men have gaped at me with their mouth open. They've struck me. They've come up in their self-pious position of thinking, well, clearly Job is a bad man. They slap him in the face. They've insolently slapped me, struck me on the cheek. They masked themselves against me. God gives me up to the ungodly and casts me into the hands of the wicked. This is not fair, Job is saying. I was at ease. Listen to the language of the poetic language of Job talking about how this calamity came on him. The swiftness that it arrived. I was at ease and he broke me apart. So he gives you this picture. He seized me by the neck and dashed me to pieces. It's like he's thinking of a piece of pottery with a thin neck. He grabbed me by the neck and he smashed me to pieces, just like that. Out of nowhere. Everything was fine, and all at once, kabam! He set me up as his target. This is what God did. Job sees God as putting him in a position. His archers are now surrounding him. And each one, the archers have now struck arrows into him. One was, the death of his children. One was the loss of his business. One was the loss of his sheep, his camels. All these are just flying into him. So unfair. He set me up as his target. His archers surround me. He slashes open my kidneys and does not spare. He pours out my gall in the ground. It's not fair. He breaks me with a breach upon breach. This is a military picture of him being surrounded in a wall. And the military people come and they slam against the wall to get in. And one after another, bashing against the wall until finally the wall is breached. Breach upon breach, and then they flood in like warriors. They rush in upon him. This is just poetic language of Job describing the unfairness that he's experienced. I've sewed sackcloth on my skin. Sign of humility. I've done everything I can before God. I've laid my strength in the dust. I've laid down humbly before God. If there's anything in me, make me right. I'm sorry, and still suffering. This is not fair. How many of you have never asked this question? You've never lived long enough. My face is red with weeping, and my eyelids is deep darkness. Although there is no violence in my hand and my prayer is pure, he knows he's innocent. O earth, cover not my blood, and let my cry find no resting place. Even now, behold, my witness is in heaven. What? Even now, behold, my witness is in heaven, and he who testifies for me is on high. Do you remember I told you, remember that Job called for an arbiter, a lawyer, someone to go between? Now he's recognizing that the one who would be between him, his lawyer, his witness, the star witness is in heaven. It's God. I have no witness on earth that can declare my innocence. I am in a situation like nobody has ever been in, Job is saying. And if the only person who could testify for my case that I want to make about God is God himself, I need an arbiter. I need a witness. Job has declared this twice, and I want you to point this out to you, and I want you to remember this because there's a theme that begins to roll through the book of Job. He's trying to make his case, and he always comes up against being frustrated that he's been treated unjustly, but he has no just means of proving his case. It's not fair. How do I tell God it's not fair? I know it's not right. How do I prove to God this is not right? I need somebody to stand and plead my case. But the only person who can do this is God himself. How does a person declare to God that he's not behaving properly? Leaping to chapter 19, let's look at this passage that we read this morning. Oh, that my words were written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. Now, you can't read those without seeing the irony of it, because clearly we're reading them in the book. Job, that happened. But at the moment that he said this, what he's declaring is, my case, I'm going to die. Okay? I'm going to disappear from this earth. It's only a matter of time. Everybody knows this. My wife has already made the egg salad sandwiches for the funeral. I mean, it's a done deal. And what's going to happen is, I'm going to die, and everybody's going to believe I deserve to die. But I know this is not right. And I know that I am being treated unfairly by God. I wish somehow that another generation could read my case and somebody would empathize and understand that this isn't right. Somebody. Oh, that my words were written in a book so the next generation could read about this and know what's going on. Oh, that with pen and with iron pen and lead, they were engraved in a rock. This is something that they did with history in Job's day, in the ancient Near East. They would carve into the rock something that had happened, and it was a stele. It was a rock, an upright rock. We still have some of these in museums around the world that depict events and situations. They would write on 4 sides. You would read them down, etc. You don't care all the details of that. That's what Job's referencing. Something that would last for generations, that people could know that unfair stuff happens to people who don't deserve unfair stuff to happen. And that they have a case too, to come before God and say, this is not right. Oh, that I could have people know this. And then, strangely, these words are so odd. I hope I can convey to you something of the depths of what happens here. There is a mystery in this moment of where in the world did Job get this idea. If this is not an inspired moment of God himself giving Job words, there is no reference to this. There is no reason for this. Out of the blue, Job cries out, for I know that my Redeemer lives. He's asked for an arbiter. He said, my witness is in heaven. And now he declares that my Redeemer, the one, the lawyer, the one, the arbiter, the one who's going to plead my case, I know that my Redeemer lives. I know that my case is going to be heard. Where did this come from? Where did this sudden flash of revelation of peace come from? I need to explain something to you about this word redeemer. If you put your crash helmets and tray tables in their upright and locked position, I just want to explain this to you because you think of the word redeemer in a New Testament sense. Someone who's gone to the cross for us to pay for our sins, to buy us back from slavery. That is not what Job was talking about because Job didn't know a New Testament idea of a redeemer. He uses an Old Testament concept that hadn't even been fully developed in the time of Job, that is explained more fully throughout various passages in the law of Moses. Goel is the word that he uses. And a goel in Hebrew is a kinsman redeemer. This is somebody who is a blood relative, a male relative who had the privilege / responsibility to act on behalf of a relative who was in trouble or in danger or in need. So if you were poor and you had a situation and you didn't have any means of dealing with this legal situation, you would go to your goel. You would find your nearest relative who had the means of fighting for your case in court. Could be your third cousin. But the blood connection made them obligated to come to court for you and pay your fine, or to do what they had to do for you. There are various rules. There's no specific passage in the Old Testament that outlines this, but it is clear various cases in the Bible in regards to a goel. Just be patient with me because it bears on what Job is talking about. A goel, for example, if you were poor and you had to sell your land as a last means of buying your family a can of beans to survive, and finally your can of beans is gone and now you live in a cardboard box under the bridge, and you are now destitute, your land is gone, your house is gone, you have nothing. If you had a situation where you could find a kinsman redeemer, a goel, you could plead your case to him that the reason you lost your land was such and so, so and so, and if he was gracious enough, he could legally go back to the person, and they were forced, they had no option, they had to sell the land to a goel. And this man could get your land back for you. If it had been taken from you, he could buy it from you. He would stand in your place and he would give you what you legally did not own and could not deserve. If you can't begin to see the gospel of Christ in these stories, in this goel, then you don't understand the gospel. Because it's exactly what a redeemer does for us. He gives us a land that we have no right to, a land called heaven that is not ours, that he purchases for us, that was once ours, but we've been kicked out. And that goel has come and done what we cannot do to give us what was once ours, that should be ours, that becomes our inheritance. This is a goel. And Job is declaring, my goel, my redeemer lives, the one who's going to make this right. A goel sometimes would rescue you from servitude or from captivity. I don't know if you remember the story, Genesis 12, not to go into it. Lot gets captured by a band of thugs, Lot and his family. He gets captured and taken to a land. Abram, who is the nearest kinsman redeemer, gathers around him 318 trained men, and they sharpen their butter knives, and they go in and they rescue Lot and his family. And they pull him out. They physically go in, beat the tar of the bad guys, and Lot is rescued. Why does he do it? Lot's got his own problems. He does it because he's obligated to him. He's a kinsman redeemer. My kinsman redeemer lives, is what Job declares. Where did this come from? How does he even know about this? This hasn't even happened in the time of Job. He's talking about being released from captivity, from the slavery of his situation. A goel would defend the helpless. The most obvious story, if you're not already thinking about it, is the story of Ruth and Boaz in the Old Testament. Boaz is a kinsman redeemer. She's lost the land. She's completely destitute. Ruth is a widow who owns nothing and deserves nothing. Read the book of Ruth, and you'll see how this kinsman redeemer comes in, buys the land back, and by virtue of buying his relative's land, he also inherits his wife, his widow, Ruth, and he marries her. And of course, this story is also the story that leads us to King David, because they're the offspring of Boaz and Ruth is David, which ultimately leads us to Christ, who is our kinsman redeemer. So this is a fascinating moment. And this is a revelation to us. And this is Job's answer, beginning of his answer. If you've still been tracking with me, the little switch on the back of your head hasn't been flipped off because this is rather long and tedious and poetic language that you're not always used to. I know you stayed up late last night to watch a hockey game. Maybe not. My Redeemer lives, he says. Where did this come from? Job, out of the blue, declares that there is a Goel who's going to plead my case. Let me tell you that this is Job's only hope. This is where he begins to find his rest. His answer, why? 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 There's no answer. The whole book of Job, have you read the book of Job? There's no answer. We don't ever find out why. What do we find out? That there is a Redeemer. There is one who knows the answer. And one who will plead his case, and one who will deal with him justly. And that is Job's hope, that one day, all of this will make sense. And that's what he does. I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last, he will stand upon the earth. What? He's now talking about the second coming of Christ. In the Old Testament, 4,000 years before Jesus is even born, give or take a few years. And he's talking about at last that Redeemer will come upon the earth after my skin has been thus destroyed, after I'm dead. Yet in my flesh I shall see God. He's talking about the resurrection. He's into 1 Corinthians 15. How does he even know about this? This is not something that's ever mentioned in the Old Testament, and Job is all of a sudden talking about final things. There was a Redeemer who's going to come, who's going to make everything right. I don't get it. I don't know why. I don't understand it. But there's somebody who's going to make sense of this. He's going to come here, and I'm going to be resurrected from the dead, and everything will make sense. And I will understand what's going on. Whom I shall see for myself, verse 27, beginning of verse 27. And my eyes shall behold, and not another. These eyes, my resurrected body eyes. The resurrection of the body is a subject in itself, and we talked about that when we talked about heaven. I'm not wanting to get into too much eschatology this morning, but it's a great subject that we talk little of. The physical resurrection of every one of us from the grave to live in resurrected, glorified bodies. And Job is talking about that. And that's Job's conclusion to his case. Yes, he realizes I can never plead my case. Yes, I will never have a lawyer to help me to stand and say that this is unfair. But there is coming a day. My Redeemer is alive. My Goel is going to step in. He is going to make things right. He will plead my case for me. He will deal with this. And I am trusting in him. And that is the claim of Job. And that is the rest that we declare. That there is a Redeemer that we have. One who stands on our behalf, not just to rescue us from our sin. Believe me, you need that. If you know nothing of the Redeemer who rescues you from the wrath of God, you need to know Jesus as your Redeemer. But he is more than that. He steps in and he makes the wrongs right on the last day. Hebrews chapter 2, 16 to 18. Surely it is not angels that he helps, talking about Jesus, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. That's us, all believers. Therefore, he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. My Redeemer lives. He enters right into your own suffering. He enters right into your own tragedy. He came to be one of us, to suffer as us, to know what it's like to be in the midst of suffering, to come and walk you through that suffering. Chapter 4, verse 14 to 16. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. He has gone through every trial. I mean, do you know the physical suffering of Jesus? Have any of you been crucified on a cross? Could you say you know that kind of physical suffering to some measure? If you've had leukemia treatments, you've gone through chemotherapy, you know what it is to physically suffer at length. Jesus is declaring that he knows what you're going through. He understands these situations. He's not circumventing them. He's saying this Goel comes and he's right with us through them. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Why? Because my Redeemer lives.